This is the Amazon rainforest, where the waters flow toward the greatest river on Earth. And not far below this scene, there is an enormous wealth of oil. Over 23 years, Texaco, now owned by Chevron, along with Ecuador's national oil company, pumped 1.5 billion barrels of that oil. Trouble is, when the drilling was finished, toxic oil pits were left behind for decades.
It's a disgrace. They treated Ecuador like a trash heap.
Each time the United States releases Saudis from the prison at Guantanamo, the kingdom dispatches a 747 to Cuba to pick them up. One of them, Khalid al-Ja'ani, was once a disciple of Osama bin Laden.
I've been involved in this jihad thing since I was young.
But what makes his story so surprising is that the Saudi government is paying for cars, homes, even marriages for these reformed jihadists.
Yeah, we want to keep him busy.
It's harvest time in the great vineyards of Italy, none greater than the 5,000 acres farmed by the Antinori family. They've been in the same line of work for 6 centuries now.
Cheers.
The Antinoris make wine, and the family's story reads like something a wine critic might write about their product. Complex, stylish, sophisticated, with a bouquet both elegant and earthy.
I'm Steve Croft.
I'm Leslie Stahl.
I'm Bob Simon.
I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Scott Pelley. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes. Chevron is America's third largest company, behind ExxonMobil and Walmart. One way it became that big was by buying Texaco in 2001, and now that purchase of Texaco has pulled Chevron into a titanic struggle in the Amazon. The people who live in a remote region of Ecuador are suing Chevron, saying reckless oil exploration poisoned the most important rainforest on Earth. Soon, a judge in a tiny Ecuadorian courtroom will decide whether the oil company must pay as much as $27 billion in damages. That would make this the largest environmental lawsuit in history. Most everything is in dispute in this bitter struggle except one thing. Powering American cars with Amazon crude has left a toxic legacy. This is the Amazon rainforest, where the waters flow toward the greatest river on Earth. And not far below this scene, there is an enormous wealth of oil. Beginning in the 1960s, Texaco came to northeastern Ecuador to tap into one of the largest oil reserves in the Americas. Texaco was a partner with Ecuador's national oil company, Petroecuador. And over 23 years, Texaco pumped out 1.5 billion barrels of oil. Hundreds of wells were drilled, and at each well site, pits were dug to hold toxic oil waste that comes up during drilling. Generally, 2 or 3 pits were carved out near the well site. Trouble is, when Texaco finished its drilling, the waste pits were abandoned by the hundreds and for decades. Manuel Salinas' house is next to one of those pits. He's one of 30,000 people suing Texaco's owner, Chevron. He says the pollution leaked into his water well.
It's a disgrace. They treated Ecuador like a trash heap.
We have a little stream here. It's
Doug Beltman worked for the EPA on Superfund sites in the U.S. He's now the scientific expert for the people suing Chevron.
Are you saying that Texaco never could have gotten away with this in the United States?
No, absolutely not. It wouldn't have happened in the United States. And if it had happened, they wouldn't have gotten away with leaving it here for 30 years.
In Texas, for example, pits like this one are supposed to be temporary, isolated from fresh water, and soon after, emptied and backfilled. But in Ecuador, this pit has been here for 25 years, and we found it's actually designed to overflow into streams.
They put these pipes in the side, so as it rains, it fills up with water, contaminated water, it just dumps out into the jungle.
Well, it rains here in the rainforest all the time, so there's water pouring out of it now. And if you smell the water, you can clearly smell The oil pollution in it runs right down the ravine where you are and right down into the stream, not 50 yards down that way. When we stirred the bottom, oil floated to the top. Texaco left Ecuador in 1992, and today, Texaco's owner, Chevron, says the pollution is now the responsibility of Petroecuador, Texaco's former partner. That dispute is the heart of the lawsuit. The people who live in this river society call themselves Los Afectados, the affected ones. They use the waterways for washing clothes, bathing, and drinking. Texaco acknowledged that it dumped into the rainforest billions of gallons of what's called production water. Production water is waste that comes up with the oil. In fact, it's often salty and laced with chemicals. We traveled downriver in search of an Indian tribe which is part of the group suing Chevron. For centuries, this has been the territory of the Sequoias.
Buenos días.
Mucho gusto, Humberto Piaguaje.
Me llamo Scott.
We sat with two of their leaders who said they had never seen oil until it was on the river. Humberto told us oil looked like flowing black blankets and ruined the fishing. The Sequoias took us to their community hut, where we saw the driving force behind the suit. Stephen Donziger, a New York lawyer, far from home.
These are people who never believed they had a right to sue an American company in their own court system.
Yeah, but you know what Chevron says. They say that this is being driven by a New York plaintiff's lawyer, and they don't mean that as a compliment.
I'm well aware of that. They've taken out advertisements in the Ecuadorian press with my name trying to attack my reputation.
What do you think of that?
Well, I think that it puts me in the membership, frankly, of a very distinguished club of people.
Make no mistake, Donziger would be wealthy if he wins, but he says that most of the money would go to environmental cleanup. Why $27 billion? Well, that astounding figure comes from this man, Richard Cabrera. Cabrera is a geological engineer appointed by the Ecuadorian court who conducted field inspections to assess the oil damage. $27 billion. I mean, come on, where does he come up with that number? It's huge.
It's huge, but in my analysis, it's still only pennies on the dollar compared to the damage done here.
Cabrera figured $9 billion should go to cleanup, plus new health and water systems. He says another $9 billion should compensate for cancer deaths, even though the lawsuit doesn't make any cancer claims. Sylvia Garrigo is Chevron's manager of global issues and policy. She argues that the court's expert is biased.
That report and Mr. Cabrera are part and parcel of the fraud that is being perpetrated against an American company in Ecuador in this corrupt and politicized judicial system.
When she says politicized, she points to the top, to Ecuador's president, who visited the waste sites and called the people who brought the suit heroes. It's a message, Garrigo says, that can't be lost on the judge.
Do you think that this judge is going to feel any independence, is going to look at the rule of law, is going to look at the contracts, is going to look at the evidence and determine what's legitimate and illegitimate?
So who is the $27 billion judge? We found Juan Nunez in his court on the third floor of this shopping mall in the Amazon town of Lago Agrio. Texaco named the town for Sour Lake, Texas, where Texaco got its start. Nunez struck us as serious and thoughtful. He's been on the case for a year, and he's been out to the waste pits. The verdict will be his decision alone. There is no jury. Chevron says that they can't get a fair trial in your court.
No es así.
That is not the case. I believe that justice has to be given to everyone as they deserve, like a good father of a family, to give a child what a child is entitled to.
How did Chevron find itself in a jungle town at the mercy of one judge? Because it got what it asked for. This is Manhattan, and in 1993, the Amazonians first filed suit in a U.S. federal court. It was Stephen Donziger's first big case, and it sat here for 9 years while Texaco pressed this argument.
Texaco's position is quite clear. This matter belongs in Ecuador.
Texaco wanted to be in Ecuador, you wanted to be in New York, and you lost.
Yes, we lost.
You think Texaco expected you to go away?
I do.
They didn't. And in 2003, on the first day of the trial in Lago Agrio, Chevron's lawyer, in his opening argument, said the Ecuadorian court didn't have jurisdiction to try the case. You wanted to go to Ecuador.
We didn't want to get sued,
Now you say
period.
you don't want to be in Ecuador.
No.
What court do you want to be in?
We don't want to be in any court, much less a court with respect to this kind of a claim, which we consider frivolous.
Chevron says it can't be sued because of a 1990s agreement Texaco struck with the Ecuadorian government to clean up some of the contaminated sites that had been abandoned for years. Texaco spent $40 million cleaning up some of these sites. In return for that, the Ecuadorian government signed off and said you're released of liability. How can you have a lawsuit now?
Well, our clients never released Texaco. That's the critical distinction. That was an agreement between the government and Texaco. We were not part of that agreement, and we're not bound by that agreement.
Although it's not specifically written into the agreement, Chevron claims it's responsible for only 40% of the cleanup because Texaco was a 40% partner with Ecuador's national oil company, Petroecuador. Chevron says anything left behind now is Petroecuador's problem.
That 60% is the sole responsibility of one company and one company alone, and that is Petroecuador.
Petroecuador, which has been running oil operations since Texaco left in 1992, is cleaning up some of Texaco's old pits, slowly, but other pits remain like open sores in the rainforest. While Texaco was a minority partner back in its day, it was the operator in charge of the oil fields, and under U.S. environmental law, for example, the operator can be held responsible for the pollution. You say you had a 40% share in the consortium, but Texaco was doing 100% of the oil production out there. I mean, this is Texaco's.
Let me tell you about Texaco's 100% production. That's the biggest falsehood that I've heard in terms of revenues in this case.
Who built the pits?
The consortium.
Which company built the pits?
Texaco was the operator.
What does that mean, to be the operator?
It means that the consortium partners have selected you to operate the oil fields, to build well sites and production facilities.
So Texaco built the pits?
I respectfully disagree, Scott. The consortium built the pits. This area here to my left.
Chevron's Sylvia Garrigo showed us some of the pits that Texaco fixed. Trees and grass stand today above what used to be waste pits. Chevron says Texaco cleaned 162 pits, but the court expert Richard Cabrera puts the total number of all waste pits at 916. Chevron says that number is inflated, so we asked Chevron for a master list of all the pits that existed when Texaco left Ecuador. But last week, Chevron told us there is no master list. And there are questions about what was cleaned up. Cabrera tested some of the remediated sites and found oil contamination higher than Ecuadorian regulations allow. Chevron has done its own tests.
In the thousands of soil and water samples that we have taken in the Amazon, there has been no detection of any type of toxin that is not naturally occurring in the environment and that is dangerous to human health or the environment.
Oil is naturally occurring in the environment. It just depends on where it is.
I have makeup on and there's naturally occurring oil on my face. It doesn't mean that I'm going to get sick from it.
Having called the country corrupt, the court biased, and the case of fraud, Chevron seems to have come to a conclusion. What do you think your chances are of winning this case?
In Ecuador, very little.
Judge Nunez is expected to rule soon. He'll decide whether Chevron is liable, and if so, how much of that $27 billion the company should pay. Chevron has no assets in Ecuador. How do you expect to collect?
In the end of the day, it might be a situation where a U.S. court enforces the judgment and the marshals have to go to Chevron and seize their assets.
There are likely to be appeals in this case that has already run nearly 16 years. In the meantime, environmental damage continues in this largely unseen part of the world. On our way out of the forest, we just happened on a major oil pipeline break. It wasn't Chevron, it wasn't Petroecuador. This time it was a Chinese-led consortium. But it reminded us of what the Secoya Indians said about black blankets on the rivers. People say oil and water don't mix, but in the Amazon, it's hard to keep them apart. Tonight, CBS News correspondent David Martin on assignment for 60 Minutes.
President Obama has ordered the prison camp at Guantanamo Bay closed, and his administration is close to figuring out what to do with the 240 inmates still held there. Some, like Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the self-proclaimed mastermind of 9/11, will undoubtedly be put on trial for their lives. But more than half the so-called detainees will probably never go before a jury, because the U.S. government does not have a case that will stand up in court. So what happens when a prisoner is set free from Guantanamo? Well, more than 500 were released during the Bush administration, and one of the largest contingents was from Saudi Arabia. So we went there to see for ourselves what happens when these young men come home to the country that gave us Osama bin Laden and the 9/11 hijackers. What we found is a rehabilitation program that attempts to make solid citizens out of holy warriors by convincing them bin Laden has it all wrong.
Each time the United States releases Saudis from Guantanamo, the kingdom dispatches a 747 to Cuba to pick them up. It's all done in secret, but 60 Minutes obtained this footage from the Saudis. The prisoners step onto the aircraft slightly dazed, their shackles and blindfolds having just been removed. On the long flight home, they are checked out by a medical team and logged into the Saudi legal system. So far, 117 Saudi men swept up in Afghanistan and Pakistan in the months after 9/11 have come home from Guantanamo. One of them, Khalid al-Ja'ani, was once a disciple of Osama bin Laden.
I've been involved in this jihad thing since I was young, and I was believing that I have to help the Muslims, and this is the right way to perform jihad.
Ja'ani first went to Afghanistan in the 1990s and was with bin Laden in the Tora Bora Mountains during al-Qaeda's last stand against the Americans. So you were in Tora Bora at the same time as Osama bin Laden?
Yeah, I met him there.
And did you leave Afghanistan at the same time as Osama bin Laden?
One day different.
He went first?
Of course.
That experience left him with an entirely different opinion of bin Laden.
And he said, we are not going to let you down, you are not going to let us down. But I saw that in Tora Bora, that when he left, so he let everybody behind him, you know.
He changes the story.
I call him flip-flop.
Johnny was captured in Pakistan and ended up in Guantanamo with hundreds of other so-called enemy combatants. 4 years later, he went home to Saudi Arabia, where he became a prime example of how the government treats one-time holy warriors it no longer considers a threat.
After 1 month, they called me and they said, okay, go and get your car. I said, car, okay.
They gave you a car?
Car, yeah. All the people that they've been released from Guantanamo, they gave them car to help them to get in the society.
Then he met personally with Prince Mohammed bin Nayef, the head of Saudi internal security. Roughly the equivalent in the U.S. of an ex-con sitting down with the director of the FBI.
I went to his office and they said, I want to get married. I said, okay, write how much it's going to cost and we'll take care about it. So,
wait a minute, first they give you a car.
Yeah.
And then they give you money to get married with.
Yeah. Then they give you the house.
So they're not just paying for the ceremony, they're paying for the house you're going to live in?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we want to keep him busy.
A top aide to Prince Nayef, Major General Yosef Mansour, says the money, which adds up to tens of millions of dollars for all the former prisoners, is not a handout, but a hand up.
These are people the United States called the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
Why would you trust the worst of the worst?
Those, after all, our kids. And you are gonna let them stay in jails forever.
Some Saudis have been in Guantanamo for 7 years. And Dr. Abdul Rahman al-Hadlak believes the longer a man is there, the harder he is to treat.
They come out of Guantanamo hating Americans.
In the beginning, yes. In the beginning, yes.
Is there evidence that Guantanamo has made them more radical?
I think so, yes. Because in their journey, you know, from Afghanistan to Guantanamo, they have faced a lot of torturing. It's so important to deal with this, issue of torture. They really need to be rehabilitated. And I think we have been successful in easing this anger, which is so important.
Torture is, of course, a loaded word, but at the very least, the treatment en route to Guantanamo was rough and provided the raw material for al-Qaeda propaganda videos to drum up new recruits.
They are trying to play on the emotions of those young guys to let them get very angry and say, we want to do something. Then those al-Qaeda guys, they will tell them, we have the answer, we will help you. Let's put your hand in our hand and do something to protect our brothers and sisters and our Muslim women.
The Saudis cracked down on al-Qaeda as only an authoritarian state can. There are now more than 4,000 real or suspected terrorists in Saudi jails. And Chris Busek of the Carnegie Endowment, who has studied the kingdom's internal security programs, says that's down from a few years ago.
10, 11, 12,000 people who had been arrested and gone through, interrogation or questioning and things like that.
So they just swept up everybody?
There were a lot of people who were, detained.
Is there any real organization of al-Qaeda left in Saudi Arabia?
There are no first or second tier level operatives in the kingdom. They've all been killed or captured.
We have hard approach, we have soft approach. Basically developing some programs to prevent this ideology from spreading in the society.
This demonstration put on for us by the kingdom's special forces was as close as we could get to the hard approach. But then the Saudis took us inside this compound on the outskirts of Riyadh and allowed us to get a first-hand look at the soft approach. Here we met Dr. Turki Otayan, a Western-educated psychologist greeting men fresh out of Saudi jails. These men will spend months listening to lectures until Otayan and his colleagues declare them free of the impulses which incited them to holy war.
I was giving them a lecture about the emotion, how they understand anger. I was trying to say anger is not, easy to control, especially in their cases.
This is what we would call in the West anger management.
Anger management, exactly.
And then there's art therapy, a surprisingly modern concept introduced by Dr. Awad al-Yami into a very conservative society. He says art gives his students a chance to express feelings they're not ready to talk about.
This is about Guantanamo Bay, probably.
No one is more central to the rehabilitation of these ex-offenders than Sheikh Ahmed Jilan.
What did you tell them about jihad?
When we talked about jihad, we told them that Islam doesn't want to send a message that our religion is a bloody religion.
Jilan, that's him batting a volleyball with those same angry men, confounds all your preconceptions about Muslim clerics as stern, remote graybeards. But he memorized the Quran when he was still a teenager and is the center's unquestioned religious authority.
Allahu Akbar.
His job is to guide these men away from Osama bin Laden and back to what he calls true Islam.
Most Americans, the one Saudi they can all name is Osama bin Laden. And they all know that most of the hijackers on 9/11 were Saudis. Why should Americans take a lesson from the Saudis, of all people?
A lot of these programs are about recognizing that being violent is not a permanent state of one's life. Just as you become radicalized, there's a process for that. Some people go through another process where you leave violence behind. Now, I think that's the part that's really important.
But here's the most important part. 11 of 117 men returned from Guantanamo have shown up again on Saudi Arabia's list of most wanted terrorists.
You can call that a 10% failure rate, or you can call that a 90% success rate.
90%. I always take the glass, you say, this is half full or empty full.
General Mansour was not laughing when Mohammed al-Alfi became a colossal embarrassment to the soft approach. Alfi came back from 6 years in Guantanamo in a back brace, went through rehabilitation, but then traded the back brace for a bandolier, and along with another graduate of the program showed up in Yemen on an al-Qaeda video denouncing the Saudi government. But according to the Saudis, Alfi's family convinced him to turn himself in. And his next video was a full confession on Saudi TV. His cooperation earned him some soft prison time, confined to an apartment where his family can visit.
He broke the rules.
Yeah.
He violated your trust.
Yes.
He ran away.
Uh-huh.
And now he's back and he gets to see his wife every day.
Yeah. His wife with him. He's not out.
He has to be the only ex-terrorist in the world who's living in an apartment with the permission of his government.
Well, he's under the government siege.
Mm-hmm.
He can't go out.
America's top intelligence officer, Admiral Dennis Blair, has said the sight of former Guantanamo inmates showing up in al-Qaeda videos, quote, does not inspire confidence in the Saudi program. But there is another, more disturbing case, which raises the question of whether Guantanamo itself is turning out suicidal terrorists. Abdallah al-Ajmi was a Kuwaiti and did not go through the Saudi program. 2 years after he was released from Guantanamo, he showed up in a martyr video with the explosives-laden truck he was about to drive into an Iraqi army base in Mosul. 13 Iraqi soldiers were killed. It's impossible to know whether a rehabilitation program like the Saudis could have turned Ajmi around.
Now there is a suicide bomber who killed people. Doesn't that tell you that you just can't take the chance of releasing people from Guantanamo?
I think what that tells you is that when you release somebody, you need to have a very, very thorough program to reintegrate them back into society. Right? I mean, the Saudis who have been repatriated thus far, to the best of my knowledge right now, nobody has been involved in violence yet.
Busek says the recidivism rate among Guantanamo returnees is better than prisoners released from American jails. But neither he nor the Saudis claim it can ever be perfect.
Here's what some people would say. If we're talking about people who would strap a bomb on their bodies, walk into a marketplace, and kill 50 people, you have to be perfect.
Well, let me assure you, these kind of people you are talking about, they are not going to be out from jail.
Families, the poet Philip Larkin wrote, they mess you up. Only he used slightly stronger language. When it comes to family business, he was right on the money. A recent survey found only 15% of family businesses survive past the second generation. If the whims of the marketplace don't get you, rivalry or old-fashioned greed will, which makes the Antinori family of Italy all the more remarkable. As we first reported last fall, they've been in the same line of work for 6 centuries now. The Antinoris make wine, and the family's story reads like a wine review. Complex, stylish, sophisticated, with a bouquet both elegant and earthy. It's harvest time in the great vineyards of Italy, none greater than the 5,000 acres farmed by the Antinori family. Until recently, Italian business, especially the wine business, was pretty much for men only.
Girls normally in families like ours ended up to be married, possibly happily, and that's it. No need to work.
But Albiera Antinori and her two sisters are the first women in 26 generations to play a major role in the family enterprise. Allegra Antinori.
I feel part of the land, you know. I think I'm owned by that land. It's something very, very strong.
From the fields to the cellars, you'll find the Antinori women at work, hoping, as vintners have for centuries, that this year the balance of sun, soil, and rain will produce a vintage for the ages. Alessia Antinori. People use these wonderful words to describe taste. There's personality. What else?
The elegance. The wine has to be elegant. And so you say, how do you describe elegance? You can't. It's like an elegant woman. How you describe her? It's personal.
You know it when you see
exactly,
it.
Exactly.
Their domain stretches from the legendary vineyards of Tuscany and Umbria to their property in California's Napa Valley. Antinori is perhaps the oldest family business on earth.
The first document which we have, which proves that an ancestor of mine was involved in the wine production, dates back to 1385.
The patriarch and still the godfather is Piero Antinori. He's 70 and bears the noble title of Marchese. He works behind an antique desk that dates to the Renaissance.
When we have to take some decision regarding the family, we have them here. And my father used to do the same thing.
And in his birthplace, Florence, the city that gave birth to the Renaissance, that flowering of art, science, and the good life, he leads a visitor to a small window to the past. It looks like a confessional. Hundreds of years ago, an Antinori cellar master sat waiting for customers to knock.
The cellar master would pass a bottle of Chianti wine, and he would receive the money back. This has been in operation until a couple of centuries ago.
Recent history by your standards.
Yes, really.
For 623 years, various Antinori have kept the business going despite war, plague, political intrigue, and the shifting tastes of consumers. The family tree shows a bumper crop of Antinori who made their mark, not just in wine, but in every aspect of Italian life.
In business, in politics, in church.
So the family always made sure back then that all bets were covered, correct?
I think it was a bit the concept, yes.
There were poets and priests, rogues and rascals. In 1576, Francesco de' Medici, the Grand Duke of Tuscany, had one Antinori strangled for his undue attentions to Bianca, the Duke's wife. In the 1700s, another Antinori cultivated Pope Clement XII as an important customer. The pontiff, who commissioned the building of Rome's Trevi Fountain, decided to throw a few coins the Antinori's way.
We have some correspondence saying that the Pope used to like very much the wines of our family and he wanted to order more.
A pretty good recommendation, correct? Especially in the 18th century.
Yes, no doubt.
But the family history lining the shelves of the Marchese's office says precious little about the wives and daughters in the Antinori family tree, a fact not lost on Albiera, Allegra, and Alessia. Are there any interesting women in those 26 generations?
I'm sure there are some women, but women in history in the past time, even if, unless they were special, they were not
Considered.
Considered
Yes, exactly.
to be mentioned.
It's true, because when I went to agriculture university in northern Italy, in Milan, we were 2 women, and the rest were all men. Very lucky.
For 6 centuries, command of the Antinori Empire was passed from father to son. But with no male heir, the Marchese some years ago sold a major stake in the business to Whitbread, a British company whose fortune was based on beer making.
It was the period when I didn't know exactly if my daughters would be interested or not to be involved in the business. And so for me that was a way to guarantee a continuity also to the company.
But the partnership produced mainly grapes of wrath. It was a vintage clash between the foaming suds of quick profits and Piero insisting he'd sell no wine before its time. This marriage of inconvenience ended when Piero bought back the shares, keeping Antinori all in the family.
I think he saw us interested and said, why not? What's wrong with girls? And so took his chance, expecting his daughters to fall in love with the business.
And that they did. Now all three travel the countryside and the world, helping to grow, promote, and market Antinori wines. They sold 17 million bottles last year, $200 million worth, making a healthy profit. And though the business now involves spreadsheets and science, the basics still come, as they have for centuries, from down on the farm. Even with all this tradition and history and everything else, the family still regards itself as farmers, yes?
Yes, absolutely. This is our origin. Still now, in modern times, we are basically farmers.
We appreciate the nature and the countryside more than the glamorous city life.
You're three country bumpkins.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Well, hardly.
Salud. Cheers.
Elegance is the rule at Palazzo Antinori, the family home in Florence. Since the family's wines must be sampled often to ensure quality control, every lunch at the Palazzo is a kind of business lunch. The Marchese, his wife Francesca, their daughters and sons-in-law, and the grandchildren all may have a say. Any family arguments at this table? Come on, secrets. I want secrets revealed here.
Yes. Sometimes we start with an argument, but after 3 or 4 glasses of wine,
everything disappears.
This palazzo has been in the family since 1506, both the headquarters of the business and also the residence of the family.
When an Antinori wishes to seek solace, or a place for quiet contemplation, or even a place to confess his earthly sins, it's hardly difficult. Just leave the Palazzo Antinori, and traffic notwithstanding, cross the Piazza Antinori, and within minutes arrive at the Cappella Antinori, the Antinori family chapel, where they might visit the tomb of Alessandro Antinori, one of the founders of the dynasty, and perhaps a nod to any number of Antinoris buried beneath the chapel floor. If wealth and history can buy you one lasting pleasure, it is convenience. Marchese Antinori, for instance, commutes by air to his most famous vineyard, Tignanello, in the Tuscan countryside south of Florence. Here the family developed the red wines for which they're famous. At his villa here, this is the view the Marchese wakes up to every morning.
We have the vineyards and the landscape.
But as the experience with the British partners showed, it's no business for the impatient or for those who have a taste for the quick buck. 10 years can pass from the time a new vine is planted until its wine comes to market.
You have to be patient and to wait until the wine is good enough, the vines are old enough to produce a good wine.
But it's not all dirt and business. There's that other estate, Guado El Tasso, on the Tuscan coast.
I did my own stable, my own training track in the middle of the vineyards. I go riding there every morning. It's beautiful. I love it.
It's a very good life you described. Are you spoiled?
Yes, I am very spoiled, but I think we appreciate what we have.
And they are constantly reminded that in this line of work, nature always has the last word. The Antinori found the 2002 crop wasn't up to par and didn't bother bottling most of it.
You cannot force things, you cannot force nature. If you have a bad vintage, tough luck. We can wake it up for a second before we put it back to sleep.
Every few months, they check on the progress of their wine, fast asleep in the cellars. The verdict, let it sleep a while longer.
You see, it's still very young, very rough, has to stay in there for a little while.
Another family meal, another bottle of wine or two. Every once in a while, someone offers to buy them out, but this farmer and his daughters politely decline, on the theory that if family ownership was good enough in 1385, it's good enough today.
It is really our intention to remain a family business because we think that this is the best solution for us.
For at least another 500 years.
At least.
Now, a few minutes with Andy Rooney.
You probably didn't know this, but I have a nervous habit of counting everything. I count small things. For example, I count stairs when I go up or come down them. Because I've been counting, I know that this is President Barack Obama's 104th day in office. Glad no one is reminding me how many days I've spent in this office. A lot of words like office have two meanings, of course. The actual office itself in the White House must be pretty much the way President Obama wants it by now, not the way Ford or Carter or Eisenhower or anybody else wanted it, even though it's the same place. President Obama uses the same desk that President Kennedy used. I made this desk myself from a great piece of walnut that I got off my property. This is something I made to keep my pencils in. It isn't much, but I like it because I made it. It's one of my small things. I bet every president has some small things on his desk that are his and his alone, too. You know, I mean something other than mistakes. The president's office in the White House was redesigned after they had a fire in 1929. Franklin D. Roosevelt had it done over in 1933. I wonder if the president wakes up in the morning these days and thinks about doing the White House over, or if he ever thinks about how many days he has left there in it. He has so many problems. He must often think to himself, geez, how much longer do I have to do this anyway? Pretty good being president, of course. He doesn't have to get his own breakfast, for instance. But being president is hard. Obama has chosen the cabinet that helps him, of course, and it's between 15 and 23 members, depending on who you count as a cabinet member. I was thinking maybe he should add one more cabinet member, a member who does nothing but save government money by cutting out things we don't need. He'd be called the Secretary of Savings, or SOS for short. 60 Minutes, by the way, is an expensive program, but it is not a government program. It's a program we need. Or it's a program I need, anyway.
I'm Scott Pelley. We'll be back next week with another edition of 60 Minutes.